Ladies and gents, welcome to UX, and this is American Mass Deportation 1, the first crackdown. US history, but channel extra history. Yeah, it's been a while since I did an extra history video. This is an interesting one though. I don't think this is about current one. Judging from the thumbnail and how the title is phrased, I'm gonna guess this is the first time USA did this. Yeah, this is a very good topic because this is a hot topic right now. Where obviously really right-wing people love it. Left-wing people basically like, oh, this is too much and whatever, like the division there is, right? So this is really hot topic right now. And knowing the history of it, that would be surprising because I don't think, I've ever heard of like USA did that before. But apparently they did. How before, how back? Yeah, it's going to be awesome. That's this one.
Okay, I hear y'all. You're all asking at this point, why are you doing this series? Well, let me tell you a little story to answer that. Back in 2015, our head writer Rob
You should never be afraid of doing anything because people don't like it. It is history in the end of the day.
was watching a Republican primary debate when then candidate Donald Trump said something that pricked up Rob's ears. Oh, and don't worry, I'm not going to do the voice, but the quote is this. Let me just tell you that Dwight Eisenhower, good president, great president, people liked him. I like Ike, right? The expression I like Ike moved 1.5 million
I'm not going to do the voice, but I'm going to do the animation. Yeah, that's better.
illegal immigrants out of this country. Moved them just beyond the border, they came back. Moved them again beyond the border and they came back. Didn't like it. Moved them way south. They never came back. Dwight Eisenhower, you don't get nicer, you don't get friendlier. They moved 1.5 million people out. We have no choice. We have no choice. Curious, Rob then started Googling a few search terms and then his jaw hit the floor. What was being referenced by Trump there was a 1954 program of mass removals that he'd never heard of. A military-style operation that involved law enforcement, mass transit, and several dozen deaths from people being abandoned in the desert. This and a similar
What? 1954, and in that result, just by negligence or whatever, a lot of people died because they were literally left in the desert. Okay, how do you justify that shit? Like, I understand everything you want to argue, but like a country of United States dropped some people in the desert where they starved to death. That isn't that like I don't know, some break some convention or some shit? That's next level.
operation in the Great Depression would be America's first attempts at mass deportation. Operations that some would see as a black mark on American history, others would view as an instruction manual, and most, including myself, have never heard about at all.
Yeah, even extra history doesn't know about this. This makes me think, are there things in the past where like USA and like, I don't know, NATO, US, Western countries in general sweeps certain things under the rug? Doesn't suppress it because that's not how democracy works, but doesn't talk about it or doesn't bring it up enough that like it goes under the rug, let's just say, where most people don't know about it until someone like this dug it up.
This first part of our historical tale is brought to you by our streaming service Nebula, but more on how we're working with them to safeguard series like this one after the episode. One of the really cool things about history is that there's so much of it.
How the fuck are you so far away from the mic? If I walk far away, like, can you even hear this? Like, I don't know. This mic is very weird. You have to be very close.
You will never know everything. In fact, one reason history is so fascinating is that it's just normal to discover something new or learn a perspective you never considered. But there is another side to that, which is that things might fall through the cracks that are important to understanding a period or your own world. And that is the very reason we're doing a series on these crackdowns. The first of which launched amid the Depression, while the second, the reprehensibly named Operation Wetback, was a much larger effort in 1954. We'll cover the lead up to them, their aims, implementation, consequences, and the resistances against them. But the first thing
It is important because, for two reasons. One is left-wing people who are just outraged right now. I can't believe we're doing this. Like, we are part of the worst part of the history. No, you've done this in the past. So maybe there'll be a few people who are like, oh, then I'm fine. Then I'm fine. Deport away. I'm pretty sure there's going to be people, bit of hypocrisy much. that I've seen a lot of time where there are certain people who are outraged only because they don't want to be associated with that or that time, not because of the result or who's getting screwed. They don't want to be associated with that. So I'm sure after hearing about this, a lot of people will be like, "Oh, so this is not the first time. Then I'm fine. Then like screw the people. I don't care."
To point out is that America's struggle with immigration and the rights of non-citizens living within its borders has been going on nearly since the founding. In 1798, the young United States found itself on the brink of war with France. Though the French had supported the American struggle for independence, the two nations had been driven apart by the radicalism of the French Revolution, America's embrace of Britain as a trading partner.
Yo, America, we need you. Like, no, we're not doing that. Thank you for your help. Fuck that. I know there's more detail, but that was so fun, right? Like that part of history is so awesome. We're gonna help you with American Revolution, this and that. But now the French thing is here. You gonna help? Fuck that.
Partner and French attacks on American merchants. Though, come to think of it, on the brink of war is underselling it. The US was in an undeclared naval war with France, and there were worries that it would escalate. This was particularly frightening for the Federalist Party and the Adams administration, since their rivals in the Democratic-Republican Party were generally fans of the French Revolution and tended to lap up the votes of more newly arrived Americans, including those from France. So, the Federalists used their majority in Congress to pass 4 new laws grouped under the term the Alien and Sedition Acts. These acts were essentially a way for the Federalists to attack their opposition party and hobble their electoral advantages. The Sedition Act, which made it a crime to speak or write false or scandalous things about the government, was used to prosecute Democratic-Republican newspapers. Meanwhile, the Alien Acts targeted the new citizens that were expanding the opposition's base. The government now had the power to deport aliens and raised residency requirements for citizenship from 5 to 14 years. Finally, the act respecting alien enemies gave the government special powers in case of a, quote, declared war or any invasion or predatory incursion, unquote. With an emergency declared, the president could direct enemy aliens to be arrested, imprisoned, and deported. Now, these acts were massively unpopular and probably lost the Federalists the election of 1800. After all, it was a blatant attempt to attack another political party and its supporters while crushing protections enshrined in the Bill of Rights only a decade beforehand. But it was also the first time the government's power to deport whole classes of non-citizens were spelled out. Throughout the 1800s, immigration would be a point of friction in American politics. Various groups, such as Irish Catholics and Italians, arrived due to conditions in their own countries. See our series on the Irish potato famine for more on that. Insane. And ended up in conflict with native-born citizens over.
Yeah, that series was insane, man. Seriously, I'm not allowed this channel. Like, there's many historical events that I've watched through this channel. From Germany to potato famine to everything, Bismarck and everything. Yeah. Okay, seriously, man, when you read about what founding fathers have created at the start of the country, you see how America is working right now, how democracy of America is working right now. You feel like, yeah, that makes sense. But there have been times in the past, in the middle of that, it is very anti-democratic or anti-American when you think about it, like how things are working. Most of the democratic things that are working in the world, where it comes to India or whatever democracy there is, kind of took things from American democracy, right? That's where it started. But when you see like in the middle of it, well, like there have been parties, there have been movements that is very anti-democratic. Obviously, people get pissed off because that's not what the founding fathers said, right? But there have been way too much friction, even to this current day, where there's many people who a certain agenda is trying to do anti-democratic things and anti-constitutional things, where people still fight back. So struggle is still there. But it's insane to think when those founding fathers like came together and think like, well, let's think about scenarios where we need to put something in writing just to make it stabilize. Even to this day, it's kind of working. That's insane to me. Sometimes people like really shit on the founding fathers, like, oh, those people are the time of the past. What the fuck did they know? Apparently, a lot of things, if it's like after centuries later, people can still see they're like, this is like foundation. That's insane.
Over low-wage jobs. But despite an increase in xenophobia and conspiracy theories featuring immigrants and Catholics, deportation was not generally used on them. However, this was not true when it came to Chinese immigrants. Thousands of Chinese had immigrated to the American West during the Gold Rush, most famously in building the Transcontinental Railroad. By this time, anti-immigrant groups were successful in passing legislation to constrain Asian immigration. The 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act barred all Chinese immigration or even entry into the United States for 10 years. It would then be regularly extended for 60 years until 1943, when it proved embarrassing given that China had joined the Allies in the war against Japan. Part of the justification was that Chinese culture was just too different and separate to ever truly assimilate into the US. Yet the Chinese Exclusion Act was not just about choking off.
Yeah, there's many elements behind that, obviously. World War II thing, it's like, if USA didn't help out with the Japan thing, and obviously like Japan was attacking USA, but Japan was also attacking China when China was in no condition to actually win against Japan, and atrocities were like much higher in China. Japan was doing that. So if US didn't amp up and nuclear bomb and all that, like China would have looked very different right now. So it was like both were getting something out of that. But obviously after that, you can't really, after all this shit, you can't really say like, oh, I'm not going to accept any Chinese immigrants. We've been through this. We've been through war.
Entry. It would also expand to give the government permission to deport Chinese people who were believed to be indigent, criminal, engaged in the sex trade, or presumed to be a burden on the state. These crackdowns often grew more stringent in bad economic times, when white workers would take a step down economically and start competing for low-paying jobs. However, in practice, deporting individuals proved to be more difficult than expected. Chinese community groups in San Francisco were not going down without a fight, and in short, those served deportation orders knew that there was a formal process. First, the migrant needed to be notified of the deportation order, then they could appeal the deportation order in a hearing. This process gave the potential deportee recourse. Plus, the deportee's country had to agree to receive them, which it didn't always agree to do. So, in other words, formal deportation could quickly become mired in both court cases and diplomatic wrangling, making mass deportation essentially impossible. So, anti-immigrant...
Okay. None of this shit happened this time. This time Trump said, I don't give a fuck, send ICE agents, grab the people without notifying anyone, and just throw them in certain country which they might not even belong to, but like mass them there. So, I mean, didn't court intervene during that time? Or did Trump say, I don't care? Is that where we are at? Like, president can just say, I don't care. This is like very weird time, man. Especially in the internet time. Back then, most of the countries didn't know what was happening until it was happening around you. Nowadays, there's internet. It's insane. Like, okay, I guess the immigration issue has become so strong that people don't care. Is that what's happening? I don't know.
Groups looked for other methods. Some of these involved violence and a wave of anti-Asian murders and assaults that swept across the West, particularly in California. But these garnered negative headlines for towns.
That's opposite today, right? California is seen as very left-wing, very Kale-eating, like can't even hurt anything type of people. Back then, it was completely different.
At a time when a place's reputation was important for attracting new residents and investment. So they tried another tactic, one known as the Truckee method. Truckee, California, was a mountain town that was about 40% Chinese, with most Chinese residents working in logging, transport, and service industry jobs. In 1876, a vigilante group known as the Caucasian League had tried to drive them out by lighting 2 cabins on fire and shooting anyone who ran out, killing a middle-aged Chinese man. Local school principal and newspaper editor Charles McGlashan, himself part of the Caucasian League, then started exploring other pressure options in the 1880s.
Really, this is legal? I don't care what your views are. You can't just light up a home and shoot anybody who comes out. That shit is criminal as fuck. As soon as I said that, there are people right now who's trying to rationalize it because you think you're in that part of group or you have to defend it. Just stop. If you can defend this shit, there's nothing's left, man.
80s. The first involved spreading rumors that all Chinese men would have their queues cut off in the street after a certain date, a grave insult in Chinese culture. And though one white supporter did cut a man's queue, that tactic failed. So McGlashan ordered a boycott. White citizens refused to provide any money to Chinese businesses, wouldn't sell them goods, and let all Chinese workers go. Meanwhile, members of the paramilitary Caucasian League engaged in intimidation and violent sabotage by dynamiting the water tank on the Chinese side of town and engaging in arson attacks on businesses and barns. The campaign of fear and economic pressure worked, and by 1900, only 2 Chinese people were still living in Truckee. McGlashan went on to get elected to the California State Assembly, where he promoted the Truckee method and its tactics of economic boycott and terror to other towns across California. The idea was to scare Chinese migrants out of their communities and ultimately.
You know how fucked up this is? Method. They make it so scientific and so clever. You just stop talking to them and punch them in the face. That was what you did. It's not a method. You talk like it's very. This is like an episode from South Park or something. Oh, by the way, I have, like, oh, people are like, I have a solution. Hear me out. Punch them in the face. And never talk to them again. Like, okay.
Back to China. This started to coalesce in an informal type of deportation known as self-deportation. The idea being to make everyday life so hostile for an immigrant that they would choose to return to their home country. Not that it was much of a choice. As the 20th century dawned, the focus of anti-immigrant campaigns switched from Chinese communities to more recently arrived groups of European Catholics and Jewish refugees fleeing from pogroms in Eastern Europe. Similarly, the First World War put pressure on the German community. Increasingly, deportations were based on the idea of keeping undesirable political ideologies out of the United States. After a series of anarchist bombings and the assassination of William McKinley, who we actually did our last series on, you can check that out here, and especially anti-war activism by the party during World War I, prominent anarchists such as Emma Goldman were deported largely for their speech. However, there was still the problem of formal deportation being expensive, slow, and often messy when it came to foreign affairs.
When it comes to legal stuff, this is a problem that people need to understand. You can shun based on morality all you want, but that's not going to do anything. The reality is, if you have anything that gives you a disadvantage legally, you're basically screwed, right? So, okay, so, you have freedom of speech. Why was she deported? Because she can be deported. She wasn't a citizen. Legal loopholes on that. Any country has a right to deport an immigrant because they are there temporarily. That's what immigrant means. Unless they become a citizen, proper citizen, that's a different thing. If you're an immigrant there, even today, right now, all the shit is happening, you can bring up morality all you want, but no, American government will deport people because it is the legal right. That's how it works. Any country can deport illegals. There's a reason why they're called illegals. Now, you can go through the process of electing people in the Senate who basically give citizenship to people who you don't want to be deported. That's a different process. But right now, you can't really scream at White House, like, why are you deporting people who are not legal here? That sentence doesn't make sense. So this is the thing. Governments, big governments, military usually exploit legality like that. And it's not really an expert. It's like their, prerogative, how you want to say it, right? And they can do that. So obviously people will weaponize that. But they can only weaponize that is because you give them that as a weapon. So don't have legal loopholes if you don't want to be screwed, right? There was I don't know who was that in USA who's activist, right? Who was speaking against a lot of things. But who was that illegally? Why would you shoot yourself in the foot? Of course, US is going to use that to deport you. Of course they deport you. You were not legal there. If you want to do all these things, be a citizen. So nobody can deport you for free speech.
After all, what if a deportee needed to be returned to, for example, the Soviet Union, given that the US had cut off relations? But by that time, local law enforcement and the Bureau of Immigration, then under the Department of Commerce and Labor, since immigration was considered a wage and jobs issue, had come up with a workaround: voluntary departure. This differed from the so-called self-deportation, in that it began with an arrest or taking of a foreigner into custody. When the officer discovered they were not a U.S. citizen, the authority figure could offer the detained person the opportunity to leave the U.S. voluntarily and even get assistance from the U.S. government in doing so. And since they had opted to leave voluntarily rather than be formally deported, there was actually a bonus. People formally deported have a black mark against them that prevents them from re-entering the United States, but voluntary departure did not carry this penalty. In fact, there would likely be no record at all. Local law enforcement could simply hand arrestees over to the Bureau of Immigration to send back. It saved time, it saved the courts money, and it could be done on a massive scale. Actually, historians who study this subject don't know exactly how many people were deported through voluntary departure and self-deporting, but there is evidence that these make up the majority of deportations from the 1920s through the 1960s. It also opened the door to a much darker tactic, because in 1924, Congress founded the U.S. Border Patrol as the police enforcement arm focusing on the porous land borders with Mexico and Canada. Another act that same year criminalized entering the U.S. outside of a non-designated crossing point. That meant anyone who had come into the country outside the proper channels was now automatically deportable, and immigration authorities.
Before that, anybody can walk into United States from any point. Okay. See, I'm sitting here as a foreigner. If you're American, I'm a foreigner. To me, certain elements that you introduce late, to me, that's insane. Like, oh, by the way, we need voter ID card. And be like, voter ID? Well, yeah, that's common here and everywhere. Why is that such a hot topic there? Like, why didn't you have voter ID before? People can't just walk from like other country. Why could they do that before? It's a country. Why couldn't you like regulate at the level that nobody can just walk in? Yeah.
Authorities could detain essentially anyone who looked Mexican under suspicion of illegally crossing. So, with its new enforcement wing, the Bureau of Immigration was now ready for its first attempt at mass deportation. It came in 1931, when the Great Depression increased anti-immigrant feeling as jobs became scarce and people competed for low-wage labor they might not have considered doing before. Union groups and labor organizations joined the call for a crackdown, feeling that migrant labor was undercutting their earnings and gave bosses ready-made scabs. As a result, labor put its shoulder behind the political task of removals. The virulent anti-immigrant feeling was particularly sharp.
See, there are two economical elements to this. I can only think of British Leyland. British Leyland, most of the things I can think of about them is just like protest, not working. That's the image of British Leyland, even though they did a lot of shit and they have much bigger history and like heritage. That's the image people have. Now, obviously, US has been profiting from immigration because they can do low-paying job. But there are people who don't like that because it's their job that they're doing. And they would, like those jobs. But they don't want to do those jobs at that price. But if there were no immigrants, companies have to pay them that price. But there is like British Leyland thing. Like, they could just go back and forth until like they're never satisfied. Unions are never satisfied. They want more and more money. Business takes a hit. At a point, they basically put all their factory outside of America, which kind of already happening even with the immigration. So imagine how much exponentially higher would that be. So you make nothing in USA, and at worst, you're basically not making outside anything. So your economy takes a big hit. You're not a $30 trillion economy, $10 trillion economy. Maybe this is exaggerated, but you see the point. This is how statistics work. So there is that whole element to it. Like, yes, you can think it like that. Like, yeah, they're taking the job. Or maybe you would have never been satisfied with the money that they would have given you instead of them, even if it's a bit higher. British Leyland level shit. And maybe the US's economy wouldn't have been as strong as it is right now if there were literal gaps and like people are asking for more and more money. Not that company can't pay for it. It's because company can't profit at a level where the economy is so big. Now, economy being this big, does that profit or does that help the US citizen right now? Maybe, maybe not. Like, there's still issues, right? Even with a $30 trillion economy, there are people who are struggling. So, like, what does that even mean? So, yeah, there's the whole thing, isn't it?
In Los Angeles, California, where the Mexican American population had grown following looser immigration checks at the southern border in the years leading up to World War I. Many especially came to work in the agricultural industries that, before urban sprawl, lay much closer to the city. Meanwhile, most farm owners didn't see a problem and conveniently looked the other way when it came to workers without proper papers. But the city council wanted them out, so city officials and LAPD began to talk to the Border Patrol. La Placita Olvera, Los Angeles, February 26th.
By the way, I know for a fact because I've heard from people who are illegal, a lot of time they don't even get paid because the owner just say, what you gonna go to the authorities? So there are the element of people who say like this is good for the immigrant as well. Understand your side. If you're illegal, you're gonna get exploited. You're gonna get very less money. And top of that, whoever is paying you might not even pay you because what you gonna go to the cops? So there is that element as well. Like these immigrants themselves are getting exploited and getting hurt in the process. Not to mention if you're illegal and not documented, anything can happen to you and no crime will be reported, which is not good in itself. There are all sides of this issue.
1931. There's a party going on. Food sellers, dancing, music floating, echoing off old adobe buildings. This is where Los Angeles began, as a Spanish pueblo dating back 150 years. Now, of course, it is the Old Town, the heart of Mexican Los Angeles, a place to socialize and feel the community spirit on a bright afternoon like this one, except for today. Because today becomes filled with shouts, orders. Men in military green move down the street, armed with pistols and batons. Others in plain clothes push from the other
Is this Warsaw equivalent of thing here, apparently? Maybe, maybe not.
end of the street. The people are surrounded. Over the next several hours, the Border Patrol keeps 400 people sitting on the ground, going from person to person to check papers and demand proof of citizenship. Keep in mind, this was one of the first immigration raids in U.S. history, so many people don't have their documents on hand. Now, accounts differ on how many people were taken to the train station and deported as a result of the La Placita raid.
That's kind of fucked up. You're not even going to let them allowed to go home and bring papers, what people are just supposed to carry papers with them? That's insane.
But one thing is for certain. It had the intended effect. It terrifies the Mexican community in LA. Over the next several years, the Los Angeles government and immigration authorities, including the Immigration and Naturalization Service, formed in 1933, will continue this, quote, repatriation program. Border Patrol will show up at dances or family parties in shock raids, establishing a cordon so anyone who runs will be caught. They'll stop people for minor infractions based on skin color, accuse them of crossing the border illegally, then lean on them for voluntary return. The point is not to formally deport. It is to make living in the United States so terrifying that most migrants are intimidated into self-deporting. Crowds of Mexican people are regular sights at the city's train station, waving goodbye to friends and family who are, in many cases, U.S. citizens born in California. Over the 1930s, 1 million Mexicans and Mexican-American, men, women, and children, will leave LA as a result of the campaign, most through self-deportation and voluntary return, which was the point. To create a...
It's so fucked up. A lot of them are probably going to be the one who were born there. Not just born there as a like, oh, by the way, might be third generation born there. Like, whose parent was American, whose grandparent was American, but just is a Mexican looking. And they have to go back to Mexico? What the fuck, man? That's kind of insane. Knowing where you're born, your land is on your land. Yeah, this is classic case of basic racism. It just is. Like, if you're deporting people just based on what they're looking and like, yeah. And I know they say like, oh, they ask for paper if you deport. No, they're doing that intimidation tactic. They don't know who's who. If you're Mexican looking or South American looking, they basically won't do business with you. They'll just bully you. They just use terror. Obviously, a lot of Americans are going to be part of that as well. So that's just fucked up.
climate of fear that avoided due process. An estimated 1.8 million would leave nationally. And this was just a rehearsal, because as World War II loomed, wartime needs would see a sudden change in the government's attitude toward Mexican migrant laborers. But even as the US government welcomed the same people it had just driven out, the Border Patrol was increasing enforcement actions, building a deportation capacity that would be used in the reprehensibly named Operation Wetback. And in this, they
I blame you, man. After all this shit happens, you still go back because they need you for World War II. Fuck you. Like, no, don't go there. Don't go to the United States. After that, like, have some pride. I don't know. Because that would piss me off, man. Really?
had a surprising partner, the government of Mexico, which again is history I was never taught until working on this series with our team. For instance, I also never learned about how in 1942, the US and Mexican governments formed the Bracero Accords. Basically, it supplied Mexican workers to fill the labor gap that left crops rotting in fields due to American workers leaving for World War II. And you can learn all about this.
And that's fucked up. If you officially tell them, like, yeah, I need your laborers to work here, like, that's basically slavery at that point if you don't give them right to be there. Even now or in the future, their children, if you just try to deport them just based on the race, is fucked up.
This policy reversal in 2 weeks or right now over on Nebula, a stream.
Yeah, well, go to go.nebula.ta for extra history and support this channel. Go to original video page link. This is literally latest episode 16 hours ago, so I'll be keeping up with that one. Yeah, no, like there are some series I'm sure I haven't finished yet. Nazi Occultum, I'm pretty sure I didn't finish because, yeah, but then YouTube goes crazy a lot of time. I will finish that, but like I have to like touch and go. Sometimes I think I don't have time, let's make a video. That video I'm usually don't approach because I know as soon as I make it and post it, YouTube's like, oh, you can't do this. It has word Nazi in it. I'll finish that. But yeah, right, this American mass deportation, I didn't know this. I'm sure a lot of people didn't know this, even Americans, which is like, yeah, interesting. Somebody who runs the channel called Extra History didn't know this. So like, how can you expect other people to know? Well, if you like my next channel, subscribe and I'll see you next time.